Welcome to our lovely viewers today for the latest episode of Near and Rupar. I am Aaron Rupar, publisher of Public Notice. With me is David Near, publisher of the Down Ballot. And David, one of these weeks we will get back to talking about some down ballot stuff. It seems like the national stories are kind of consuming all the oxygen. Not that there's not interesting stuff happening further down ballot and at the state level, but we tend to talk about the big news stories of the week. And of course, this week that was the indictment of James Comey. I'm actually trying to think back as I'm saying this to earlier in the week news stories that happened, but things happen. Everything all the time, so much these days that I don't remember Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and the first part of Thursday. I just remember the Comey indictment. So we'll see if my memory is jarred as we talk further about the Comey indictment, kind of the backdrop, which is, as we've named this episode, the unconsolidated authoritarianism of the Trump regime. And, that's a reference to the fact that, Trump is making these really big moves, like pushing DOJ officials to indict Comey and, possibly Letitia James in the future, maybe even Adam Schiff, while not really having the support from the public that I think, inspiring authoritarian would want, and really kind of taking lawless actions and overstepping and things of that sort. So, there's kind of a contrast there where Trump is unpopular and getting more unpopular. His agenda is very unpopular. I saw some new polling today where the midterms, especially on the House side, are looking increasingly dicey for Republicans. And yet, the headlines are kind of, Trump really acting like a strong man, persecuting his foes, taking all sorts of lawless action, aspiring to be a dictator with economic policy and all these tariffs that he's implementing. So, there's a sense of whiplash, I think, kind of permeating society at this point. But I guess let's start with the Comey indictment, David. And, what was your reaction when this came down yesterday? Just a bit of context before I kick it to you. I was a little bit surprised. I mean, we knew that the timing wasn't a surprise given the reporting over the weekend, Trump basically purging the U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia because he would not bring these charges. So we knew Trump wanted to do this. But, myself not being a lawyer as you are, I know you talk about yourself as being more of like a lapsed lawyer at this point.
Yes, that's correct.
I was kind of surprised that, and we talked a little bit about this offline, but, obviously there's the old saying that a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich, the idea being that it's pretty easy for federal officials to secure an indictment in cases like this. But even with that, and then after I read the indictment, which is like 1.5 pages long, there's no detail in there at all. I couldn't really shake the feeling of like, what were these grand juries doing? How could Trump and the U.S. attorney in this case secure an indictment? But what was your reaction?
I think that the saying in its original version is that a prosecutor could indict a ham sandwich. And the important thing to note here is that Lindsay Halligan, the person that Trump just appointed, is not a prosecutor. She was an insurance attorney with zero experience prosecuting any cases whatsoever. Just a classic apparatchik shoved into the spot because she'd be a pure loyalist. And I forget the name of the person he just shoved out.
I think it's like Siebert.
Yes,
something like
right.
that. Yeah.
So many names. It's so hard to keep track of it. And that's part of the point, too. So the fact that this indictment is so embarrassingly shoddy, it encapsulates so much about the Trump regime. It's on the one hand shocking, but on the other hand, not surprising. I read a really good piece at a little site I want to introduce you to called Public Notice this morning by Lisa Needham, one of your writers, who talked all about this indictment. And she pointed out that when you look at the indictments of Donald Trump, they were dozens and dozens of pages long with great detail sustaining the accusations made in them. And it's not just because it was Donald Trump. Ordinary criminals, run-of-the-mill criminals, also usually see lengthy indictments, especially when they're being prosecuted in federal court. So this just shows you exactly how desperate Lindsay Halligan was to comply with Trump's demand here. And also, let's not forget that they were up against a clock because the indictment is based on Jesus Christ. I mean, it's so absurd to even give these allegations kind of any credit or like to try to pick them apart. But the indictment is based on testimony that Jim Comey gave to Congress 5 years ago, alleging that he lied to Congress, which is a punishable under the federal criminal law. And the statute of limitations to charge anyone under for violating such laws is 5 years, and that testimony was just shy of 5 years ago. So obviously, this was extremely hasty. Obviously, it was slapped together like BS. Comey released a video saying that he intends to fight this, and I think that to me is maybe the most important thing here, because this relates back to one of the other stories, and I don't want to go on forever, that we have already almost forgotten about, which is the huge turnaround on Jimmy Kimmel here and the unpopularity that you mentioned, that it's a lot easier to fight back against this unconsolidated authoritarian regime when the person at the top is super unpopular.
Yeah, that's, as you mentioned that, and I was kind of straining earlier to remember what happened earlier in the week. I completely forgot about Jimmy Kimmel. We actually, he was back on the air, I believe, was it Monday or Tuesday that he was back? And there was a lapse of one day because the show went on so late, ended up doing a newsletter about it for Thursday. The show was on Tuesday. And by the time the newsletter went up on Thursday, it was like already kind of old news. I thought the piece was really good that was cited, but I think people kind of got their Kimmel fix on Tuesday and Wednesday. So, I mean, the news just moves so fast. And I was very grateful to Lisa that we were able to jump on the news of the indictment yesterday, because again, had we not had the piece up today, by tomorrow or Monday, God knows what's going to happen over the weekend. The Comey stuff will kind of feel like old news. And I don't want to push you too hard to put your lawyer cap on, because again, you're kind of a lapsed lawyer here, but there was some speculation on Fox that this case may not make it all the way to trial. Andrew McCarthy, who is a Republican lawyer, I believe he's a Fox News contributor. He's on Fox all the time. He has gotten a lot of, I don't know if coverage is quite the right word, but attention over the past 36 hours, because he's been on Fox basically saying they have no case. This is bunk. Now, the thing that struck me is that while they're talking about this, and McCarthy is talking about this with other Fox hosts, the point that keeps being made is that the judge who was assigned to this case was a Biden appointee. And this is kind of one of the twisted things in our era where, like, just the mere fact that a judge was appointed by Biden in the Fox News universe kind of makes them very suspect that nothing they rule could possibly be on the level. It's got to be political. And so even McCarthy kind of granted that on the merits, this case should be dismissed. But because this judge might want to go out of his or her way to make it seem like everything is on the level, like maybe this does make it to trial. Now, the trial, of course, will be a big media spectacle. I'm not sure. I think with cases like this, there would not be kind of like live coverage in terms of video and things like that. We'd be relying on court reporters. But, what do you think about that? I mean, do you think that this case ends up making it to trial? Maybe it's hard to say.
It is hard to say because it's such a bizarre situation. And Comey in his video specifically said, let's go to trial.
Yeah.
But the fact is that the vast majority of criminal prosecutions in this country never make it to trial, whether at the federal level or at the state level. And so on that level alone, a criminal trial would be extremely unusual. And then, as we've been talking about, there's just this weakness of the case. And indictments can get tossed. Defendants in criminal cases often file motions to dismiss their cases ahead of trial, and they don't often succeed. But if it's ever going to succeed, this might be it. Now, I feel like we're getting like really deep into the weeds about like exploring the possible psychology of a Biden appointed judge, whether they would be disposed against Comey precisely to avoid allegations that they were being favorable to Comey. I don't know. I don't feel like we can possibly answer those types of questions. I wouldn't be surprised at all, though, to see this case go away without any sort of trial. And that's the thing. I'm not sure that Trump really cares. I mean, like, of course, he'd be angry. He'd be, tweeting furiously. But I wish I could remember who said it, but I saw a very good tweet yesterday. It might have been Pope Hat. I think his name is Ken White. A legal commenter. You see him a lot on Blue Sky. He said that, and this comment may not be original to him, but the process is the punishment was the term. And that is something that I think is very important to understand, that, someone like Comey, who is well off and has access to all the legal resources in the world, for someone like him, he can afford to fight this. But for so many people, as we have seen at so many levels, simply being indicted, being said to be target of investigation, being accused of wrongdoing, no matter how falsely, the authoritarians understand that they can weaponize the process even if the outcome does not result in any kind of trial or conviction.
Yeah, let me interject here that if you are a paid subscriber either to the Down Ballot or Public Notice and you have questions about Comey or the indictment or anything else, you can drop them in our live chat and we will be happy to address them here as we go. But just to pick up on something that you said that, I think is kind of worth, reflecting a little bit here is, there's kind of this thought with Trump that, oh, there's this grand strategy and while he's coming after his foes. But when you really kind of drill down on Comey, he's such a strange target in a lot of different ways. I mean, number one, Comey has kind of been keeping a pretty low profile in recent months. I mean, this isn't someone like an Adam Schiff, who's like an outspoken critic, or even someone like a Lisa Cook, where you can kind of understand, okay, if they can force her off the Fed board, then they can appoint someone to replace her who's going to be more compliant and then maybe get interest rate cuts. Like with a lot of these persecutions, you can kind of see there's a little bit of like the chess pieces in motion and there's a move after the move. But with Comey, I mean, we can go back even further that in 2016, I mean, if anything, Comey played a large role in helping Trump get elected. Now, of course, Comey, once Trump took office, was investigating the campaign for possible collusion with Russia. Trump didn't like that. He ended up firing him. That was one of the first real debacles of his first term, maybe only second after like the Muslim ban. But it set the stage for a lot of the problems that Trump had throughout his first term. So maybe there's some bitterness surrounding that. But that's kind of the strange thing. And then even with what you're saying in terms of the process being the punishment, first of all, Comey is the guy who loves attention. Again, he's been keeping a little bit of a low profile, but I think that's mainly because he sort of tried out when he wrote a book later in Trump's first term that wasn't super well received. It seemed like he was kind of interested in running for president. No one wanted that. But now he's kind of this video he put out yesterday. He kind of came across as like this hero. Let's go to trial. I have faith in the the judicial system in this country. So even the process doesn't seem to be a punishment for Comey. I'm sure that on some level, I'm sure his family is worried about this, but the chance of being convicted seems extremely low. He's going to get a lot of attention. And this is not going to make Trump more popular. I think your normal American doesn't like the idea of the justice system being weaponized against the president's foes. And so that to me was something I kept coming back to and reflecting on this is, the strategy to it really doesn't make sense, even from kind of like the authoritarian, mindset. And there's not really like any utilitarian benefit in terms of getting lower interest rates or like purging a prominent foe or even putting a chilling effect on people because, the specific claim in question, we don't have to go all the way down the rabbit hole, but in this testimony that Comey gave in 2020, there was a controversy over whether or not Comey had authorized Andrew McCabe, who is a lower level FBI official, to leak to the press. But the charge itself is based on Ted Cruz's paraphrase of something that Comey had said. So it's weak kind of on all fronts. And the comment in question wasn't even like a political comment. It was kind of this like arcane procedural thing about news reports that where Andrew McCabe was a blind source for them. So I don't know, the whole thing doesn't make a ton of sense to me. Is there some level in which you can kind of see some broader, authoritarian strategy at play here?
Aaron, you spend more time immersed in the MAGA cinematic universe than, well, first off, that is healthy, but second off, than anyone I know. And what this reminds me of is what the Republicans and MAGA diehards have been saying about Bill Clinton with regard to the Epstein files, that they don't really seem to understand. They don't have a good understanding that there are people that maybe they hate that the rest of the country just doesn't give a shit about. And so they think, if Epstein files get released, then you Democrats are going to be super upset because Bill Clinton's name is all over them. And like Democrats say, are like, Bill who? Like,
Yeah.
I have, I have some fond feelings about his presidency, but like,
Sure.
if he's a bad guy in this, I don't give a fuck. And
Yeah.
so, it's same with Jim Comey. Like Jim Comey is, if anything, absolutely loathed by most people outside, and many people in the Democratic Party, the pro-democracy movement, for what he did to push the 2016 election in Trump's favor, as you were saying. But I think that because Trump hates Comey, that he thinks that his enemies must love Comey, and therefore he's
Yeah.
a worthy target. That's the best that I can best view I can get on this. A lot of his moves just don't make sense. Not just this one, obviously. I also, Aaron, I want to pause for a second because we have a really good question here from Wendy, who asks, with extremely weak evidence, do you think Halligan, the new U.S. attorney who just indicted Comey, do you think Halligan might be sanctioned, or do you think the judge would avoid that because of being a Biden appointee? Sanctions of a lawyer in a case are they tend to be pretty rare. It's a pretty extreme type of punishment. Of course, there can be a huge range of sanctions. But to get back to this piece that Lisa Needham wrote for you today, Aaron, she made a really excellent point, which is that there is one area in which Trump's power as president simply does not extend, and that is to the question of disbarment. Because we have seen all of these Trump stooges, like Rudy Giuliani in particular, but not just him, get disbarred for making misrepresentations and lying before courts. And Trump can't pardon someone for getting disbarred. So if
Mhm.
Halligan bends or breaks the law here, she could find herself without a law license, and there absolutely nothing Trump can do. So that may be on her mind. She also might not care though. She might
Yeah.
figure she's not exactly a high powered attorney. She
No.
might figure her future is on the wingnut welfare circuit after Trump anyway. But it is something that other prosecutors have to worry about, especially any line attorneys who might also have their names on the case.
Yeah, I had never heard of her until a few weeks ago when she started appearing on Newsmax because she was kind of the liaison in the Trump administration for like wrecking the Smithsonian's. So her job was to kind of
Right.
go on there, oh, they spent too much time focusing on slavery and there needs to be more exhibits about like hope and how America's gotten so much better. And she cut, she had this the kind of the Trump look, with the long blonde hair and makeup and the whole
Oh, yeah.
bit. But I had no idea. So when I saw the first reports of her name being connected with this U.S. attorney gig in the Eastern District of Virginia. At first, I didn't connect the dots that it was the same Halligan because when I saw this woman on Newsmax, and to build on your point about the wingnut welfare thing, she has no charisma. She's on there like it's very deadpan. It almost seems like she's kind of reading her responses on TV. So she wouldn't be, someone that you would kind of envision like hosting a Fox show or hitting the lecture circuit or something like this. But I had no idea that she was even a lawyer. I was kind of wondering, I remember having the thought when I saw her, like, it's almost like Create a Blonde or something where, Trump finds these women to put on TV who's, speak on his behalf. But, then when I realized that it was the same Lindsay Halligan who had been on Newsmax, and I think she did a couple Fox hits too, it was like, oh my God. So yeah, I mean, the whole thing is just clownish from the top down. And you think that the fact that they had to kind of rush this indictment because of the statute of limitations that you brought up earlier, I mean, obviously, that shouldn't be a consideration under the law, really, that we need to
Of
hurry up
course.
and prosecute these guys because we need to have a scalp before, before the statute of limitations passes. That would be another factor that you would think that would be on the side of, this is kind of a targeted prosecution, not one that is really based on the merits. But I guess, and I do, as I'm saying this, I am feeling guilty because of the point that you brought up earlier, where it's like, to go too in detail with this stuff kind of misses the broader points of just how abnormal all of this is. And, the story is really that Trump is persecuting his political foes and weaponizing the DOJ to do it, not whatever James Comey testified 5
Right.
years ago. So,
Exactly.
we should really make sure that we stay focused on that.
Absolutely. And I want to circle back to something we were touching on earlier, both of us, about Trump's unpopularity, because Paul Krugman had a really good piece this week talking about how Putin in Russia and Viktor Orban in Hungary were able to achieve their consolidation that Trump has been unable to achieve. And a big part of it, he points out, is that they were both popular, Putin especially so, because the Russian economy was in a shambles 25 years ago, and Putin presided over a growing economy, and that helped ensure his popularity and helped make sure that no one really wanted to oppose him, that fewer and fewer people had any interest in sticking their necks out. And Orban was never quite as popular as Putin, but he was always broadly popular. And Trump, sometimes if you say, Trump is the polls show Trump is unpopular, Trump doing X is unpopular. Sometimes people respond and say Trump doesn't care. Well, first off, I do think Trump cares. Trump is always extremely image conscious, even if he acts in ways that suggest he doesn't care. But what matters far more than whether Trump cares about his polls is how other people and other institutions react to them. Because if ABC canceling Jimmy Kimmel was popular, then I don't think that Disney would have reversed course on this. I mean, maybe they would have, but it turned out that nuking Jimmy Kimmel was extremely unpopular. Disney's stock price swooned
Mhm.
totally organically without any leadership from the top. There were reports of large numbers of people canceling their subscriptions to Disney Plus streaming service. And in just 5 days, they completely turned around on this. And I don't think that that would have happened without Trump's poll numbers being in the dumps. And to me, that is maybe the most important lesson of our time. That yes, there is so much Trump can do to punish and persecute people and to inflict real harm and to even kill people. But the fact is, there is a lot that ordinary folks can do to push back against this. And we just saw that this week in really spectacular fashion, not least the fact that there was a huge Streisand effect here because Jimmy Kimmel's show upon his return, like completely obliterated his past ratings, which you gotta
Oh yeah.
love because Trump is so obsessed with ratings. And one thing he always includes every time he goes after these late night hosts is, oh, Jimmy Kimmel's ratings are terrible. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
not anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really good point. And I do think, yeah, and I'll give you a moment to read the long question that was posted. It might be a good one, but it's hard to read that on the
Okay.
fly. Yeah, keep them relatively short, people, because that can be kind of hard to read on the fly. But yeah, with the Kimmel stuff, first of all, kind of building on what you just said, I mean, I do think it was a good reminder that, within capitalist systems, kind of the power of the pocketbook can win out. I don't think that Disney, consulted necessarily Trump's polls when making the decision to bring him back this week. But I think that when you get to critical mass of people canceling your streaming service, the financial incentives change a little bit. So I think, to me, that was kind of a good reminder that for as powerless as we sometimes feel and kind of the despair that people can have about our overall political situation right now, just canceling a subscription and posting it on social media is
Yep.
it's a very small thing, but when that becomes kind of like the cool thing to do, as it did last weekend with people canceling Hulu or Disney Plus, that can really have an impact. Because I'm sure that had a large role in the decision to bring him back. And then, yeah, I mean, the reversal, how quickly it occurred, surprised me as well, because I thought this would at least be, like a week or two. You kind of keep him off the air and, you see how things kind of settle. But, I think it ended up being off the air for like 3 or 4 nights total between last week and Tuesday when he came back. So yeah, it was kind of heartening on multiple levels. I mean, did you end up watching his show on Tuesday? Did you stay up for it, or?
I did not.
Oh, you
Did
didn't stay
you?
up? Yeah, I mean, I felt obligated. I ended up, and this is maybe a little bit inside baseball, but sometimes the late night shows can be very prickly about clips, because they're kind of more proprietary. It doesn't necessarily have the same
Mhm.
news value that like, CNN at mid afternoon does. But I kind of got carried away because I was a little bit concerned. I know Jimmy, his public persona. I know him a little bit through social media. I didn't expect him to kind of get out there and kind of bend the knee and apologize or anything like that. But I was a little bit concerned that he would kind of go more of the
Yeah.
direction of like a Jimmy Fallon and not be super political. But no, I mean, he came out swinging. He did a supercut of Trump ranting about Tylenol from the day prior, which was actually quite compelling. And he called Trump thin-skinned. He had a number of quotes. One that stands out was something to the effect of, my show isn't important. It's the fact that in our society we can have shows like mine
Yes.
that
Yes.
can't be censored. So it ended up being a very memorable monologue. And I am not an avid consumer of late night TV. I mean, my job is kind of watching cable or streaming throughout the day. So I don't necessarily unwind by watching more. But actually, I saw my mom briefly that afternoon, and she ended up having to kind of hurry home because she was like, "I need to watch Kimmel." And then it kind of
Wow.
sunk in that like, okay, I'm going to have to really watch this to kind of see what he says. And I'm glad that I did because it was really, really good. And now I'll kind of go back to, mostly not paying attention to Kimmel. But, it was kind of because you had Kimmel on Tuesday night with his show and obviously the monologue. And then over on Colbert's show, you had Gavin Newsom the same night. So kind of flipping back and forth between the two that night, it was kind of a reminder that, for as much as the media has kind of lurched Trumpward, and, you had ABC obviously bending the knee with one of the defamation lawsuits that was silly. And, the CBS settlement over the just ridiculous allegations of that editing a Kamala Harris 60 Minutes
Right.
interview was tantamount to election interference. For all of that, I mean, these shows are still capable of, platforming prominent Democrats and having a message that is very anti-Trump. So it kind of reminded me a little bit of like the first Trump term in that way, where it felt like the media wasn't nearly as on board as they have been this time around.
So I want to back out a little bit because you alluded to something there that I think is really important. As I was saying, this Disney boycott was extremely organic, and it wasn't just people canceling, Hulu or Disney Plus subscriptions. There were all of a sudden articles about people who are massive Disney fans, these so-called Disney adults who, go all the time to Disneyland or Disney World. They have Disney tattoos. They're just obsessed with the whole, Disney fandom. And these people, I mean, with the Disney tattoo saying, I don't want a part of this anymore, that this is bullshit.
Well,
But it's not sufficient. And there has to be leadership as well from anyone who cares about democracy. And for Democrats in particular, we have seen a little bit of this, and we need to see much, much more, which is Democratic officials in Congress making clear that anyone who goes along with the illegal actions of the Trump administration is going to face consequences when Democrats are back in power. Chris Murphy, in particular, senator from Connecticut, has emphasized this point. But I say you allude to it, Aaron, because of these various settlements that these major media companies made with Trump, paying him money to make absurd BS legal cases go away. Maybe that's tantamount to bribery. Brendan Carr, the FCC chair, openly threatening these companies with, if you don't basically kick Jimmy Kimmel off the air, then we're going to have to do it the hard way. Maybe there's culpability or criminal liability there as well.
mhm.
And so Democrats need, there has for so long in the Democratic Party, as long as I have been politically aware, this urge to say we want to look forward, not look back. This was very true in the Obama era regarding Bush and the Iraq war. And it was certainly true once again with Joe Biden's election. And Joe Biden pitched himself essentially as the candidate of making everything go back to normal. And that was a worrying approach at the time and it only worked very temporarily, and it clearly did not work for the long term, because you can't just make things go back to normal by wishing they would go back to normal. And one way you can make things better is by saying all of the wrongdoing and all of the crimes that have been committed by this authoritarian regime, they are going to be investigated, and where warranted, they're going to be prosecuted.
Yeah, and even a more basic one, as we were talking about the Comey stuff earlier, is like, has anybody watched Kash Patel's testimony lately? I mean, the amount of lives before Congress, with the 5-year statute of limitations, like that carries into whoever the next president, will be. So, I mean, that's one very straightforward one. Lying to Congress is a crime, and RFK Jr., Kash Patel. I mean, you go right to Bondi. It seems like there's some exposure there to potential charges depending on who the next president is. And I just want to mention here, to put a bow on the Kimmel discussion, that Helen, I'm taking
that
her
was
word for it
good.
here. But she says, just in from WTOP, the DC area will be able to watch Kimmel tonight after the Maryland-based Sinclair station said that it's ending its preemption. So there you go, because that was one of the, maybe something that we should have mentioned as we were talking about this earlier, that despite Kimmel going back on most of the local ABC affiliates, Sinclair continued the preemption, and which is kind of a strange
Nexstar
twist
as well.
Yeah, Nexstar as well. That DC, the ABC affiliate in DC is a Sinclair station. Obviously, DC being a very very left-leaning market, that's kind of a weird fit. But apparently tonight they will be able to watch Kimmel again. So if you had canceled your Disney Plus because you were upset, and you're just watching, Kimmel over the airwaves, you will again have the ability as of tonight, apparently, to watch him. I did want to pivot a little bit, unless there was anything else, David, that you wanted to bring up on these topics we've been discussing, because this is actually a question that's been on my mind, and it came in from, I believe it was Karen who posted this. I'm losing it in the chat now, but I remember what it was. Yes, it is Karen. Because I've seen some commentary about this week, and I have not been tracking it closely. I believe that, and she's a member of Congress, Mikey Sherrill is how it's pronounced, right? Is that her name is pronounced? She's been in the news this week because of, and it's a very complicated scandal, but one of her opponent in She's running for governor of New Jersey. Her Republican opponent asked the VA for some records of her service, ended up getting way more than he bargained for, including like her social security number, address, like basically all of her personal info, which I believe then made its way onto the internet. And so this has become kind of another weaponization scandal in the sense of, was this actually an accident on the VA's part, or were they really kind of colluding with this Republican campaign in a way that, potentially could endanger her safety, not to mention the potential of like financial malfeasance, someone, hijacking her financial info and things like that. But then Karen asked, Mikey Sherrill is in, or just stated, Mikey Sherrill is in big trouble in New Jersey. And I have seen some polling indicating that that race is pretty close for comfort in a blue state, especially on an off cycle election. So what's your understanding of the state of play there? And is she actually in some trouble?
I really, really need to caution people. Never let your opinion of an election be decided by a single poll. I cannot emphasize that enough. Anytime that there is some poll that is outlierish, that looks different from all the rest, it gets tons of attention on the internet. And then so many people decide that that single poll is the absolute truth. And there was a poll that just came out yesterday from Emerson College, an independent pollster done on behalf of some media organizations that showed the race between Mikey Sherrill and Jack Ciattarelli, her Republican opponent, tied. But it's the only poll that showed the race that close, except for an internal poll from the Ciattarelli campaign, which also had a 1 point race. Every other poll has shown Sherrill up 6, 7, 8 points. And to illustrate this, there was another poll that came out yesterday from a group backed by the Koch brothers that had Sherrill up by 7 points. Guess which poll got more attention? Obviously, it was the Emerson one showing the race tied. And it really said something to me that even the Koch brothers, they're some education reform quote unquote group that they fund, that they're churning out a poll that even that one shows the same as almost all of the other polls. So that's really, really important to emphasize. I say it all the time. It feels like it falls on deaf ears most of the time. But if I can reach one person with this message, don't just rely on a single poll. And in fact, Aaron, we actually led this morning's newsletter at the down ballot today with this because I'm not just picking and choosing polls. I'm not cherry picking. I'm not trying to unskew. And the reason why I say that is because there's another piece of information out there about this race that I think is really, really meaningful, more meaningful than any single poll. And that is the ad spending. And Democrats right now for the rest of the race have more than $13 million booked to help Mikey Sherrill win that race, which is in November. Republicans only have 2.5 million. If Republicans thought that this race was a toss-up, why aren't they dumping in more money? They certainly could if they wanted to, but they don't seem to be. Now that could change. There's still plenty of time left on the clock, but you have to view polls you have to view them holistically as part of all the other evidence. And right now, yes, this one poll shows a close race, but the ad spending doesn't show that Republicans actually believe that it is that close.
Yeah, and you make good points there because with a lot of these state level races, another issue is that it's not like there's daily polls like there's with the presidential races where you can do like a daily tracker of the polls. I mean, you probably get little data points here and there. And so it can be difficult to kind of put them together in any sort of trend line. So I think your commentary there, in the sense that you have to look at other indicators, not just polling, spending, kind of, what's the environment in which these campaigns are happening? Are Republicans putting resources into this one? And, that strikes me that you're correct, that maybe people are kind of running wild. I was kind of, I will plead guilty on this one because I've been watching Fox today, kind of for obvious reasons with the Comey stuff, and they made a big stink out of this. Whole of New Jersey is like evidence that the Democratic brand is in tatters, and Dems, if you hope this cycle is going to be great for your candidates, like think again. Here's this poll in New Jersey showing basically a tie. So, your expert input there is noted on my end.
Well, I very much appreciate that. And look at everything else that's happening, not just special elections, but Republicans. My God, every week there's an article about how Virginia Republicans are in total disarray, that they've all but given up hope on their candidate winning the governor's race there. You really do have to view things in as broad a way as possible. But Aaron, we have about 10 minutes left, and I feel like there's a huge issue that we haven't really been able to dig into as much as we would have wanted because of all of these authoritarian moves by Trump lately. But it's the shutdown that's looming.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
at this point, right now, September 30th is the deadline day. And if there is no budget agreement in Congress, the parts of the federal government will shut down. And right now, Trump seems to want a shutdown. He almost seems to be taking credit for a shutdown. Like he's convinced himself that a shutdown would be a good thing. And I think there's been a lot of fear and paranoia on the part of some Democrats, some commentators saying, oh, Democrats would get blamed for a shutdown. The fact of the matter is that Republicans are in charge. I think everyone understands that Republicans are in charge. They control both houses of Congress and the White House. And I think, and polls also back that up, that people would blame a shutdown on Republicans. And if there's a silver lining here, it's that does anyone really think that Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries want to or are capable of engineering a shutdown? I think this one is, if it happens, which is looking quite likely, I think it's going to get blamed very widely on Trump.
Yeah, and I saw that G. Elliott Morris had a post up today, basically reinforcing what you're just saying. That polling indicates that Republicans are going to take the brunt of the blame on this one, and it seems like the battle lines on this are quite set at this point. Where I think we touched on this briefly last week, but Dems are really making kind of maximalist demands in the healthcare space in terms of all the cuts that were in the big beautiful bill for Medicaid, basically reinstating all of that funding and the Obamacare subsidies as well, at least for not a short-term period, for at least a medium-term period of time. Of course, these are kind of non-starters for Republicans because the healthcare cuts were basically how they funded all of the tax cuts in the legislation. So, it does seem like we're going to at least have a short shutdown. And then, it's kind of fascinating from there because I really don't anticipate Republicans blinking. And again, this is one of those assumptions that we sort of have to question sometimes, I think, in our own minds when we think about politics in terms of, we sort of assume that Republicans on a lot of issues are totally inflexible. They're not going to compromise. And then, if you take that as kind of a given, then it's like, well, when are Democrats going to cave? Maybe unpredictable things will happen when we get to a shutdown. I think, it's hard to exactly know how things are going to play out, but we can at least see the broad contours of the fight. And then once we get into a shutdown, what does the end game become if Republicans aren't willing to compromise? And what happens if the government just stays shut down? I mean, I believe the longest shutdown in history happened during Trump's first term. It was something like 35 days. So I guess, we'll just have to wait and see. But, I have been heartened that Democrats seem to both have kind of specific asks that they're making this time
Right.
around and a specific message, neither of which was really in place back in March when Schumer caved at the first opportunity when a shutdown was kind of on the horizon. It seems like in this case we're at least going to get there, and then we'll just have to see what happens.
I think it's also worth drilling down a little bit into the parliamentary procedures at play here, because the issue is the filibuster. The Republicans in the House can, and in fact, they already did pass a bill that was, DOA in the Senate, a funding bill. So the House is not an issue. The issue is, is there a spending bill for which you can get 60 votes in the Senate? And Republicans could choose to eliminate the filibuster. They could go ahead and do that, and it's something that Trump, at least in the past, has demanded. He spent a lot of time, at least a fair bit of time, in my view, in his first term, hectoring Mitch McConnell, saying, "Get rid of the filibuster; it'll all be amazing," yada yada. And McConnell refused to go there. He understood that the filibuster is much more helpful to Republicans and much more damaging to Democrats. But it does make for a very simple message for Democrats to say, "You have the majority, you pass a bill." And so I do wonder if Trump at this point might say, "Screw the filibuster, just pass something with 50 votes. That's all you need." And McConnell stood up to Trump on this, but will John Thune, who's McConnell's replacement, would he really stand up to Trump if Trump starts railing against the filibuster? I don't know. What's your read on that?
I don't think so. I mean, Thune to me has been kind of disappointingly compliant because I believe if you go back to January 6th, I think he's kind of made some noises about, oh, this is horrible, and Trump was really in the wrong here. I mean, he's not in that mode any longer. He had, and I'm as you mentioned his name, he was on CNN the other day, and I believe it was on the Tylenol issue. This was, I believe, the day after Trump's insane town hall press conference, and Dana Bash basically asked him, something effective like, "You've supported public health in the past. How can you possibly be on board with this?" And he did this kind of like painful triangulation of like, well, he's the president, and we need to kind of you consult with your doctor, but like he has the right to, he ran on shaking up healthcare and things like this. And I basically posted the clip and said, "A true profile on courage." And I actually had people who were kind of pushing back on me, saying, well, the fact that he even had a little bit of daylight with Trump and kind of saying like, talk to your
Uh,
doctor. Yeah. So, I mean, people are kind of thirsty, I think, for any sign that Thune, might have some independence here, but I really don't get the sense that he would. Now, I will say there have been House Republicans on Fox already calling for Senate Republicans to nuke the filibuster. So that could be, as you mentioned, that I could see that being the end game because, of course, Trump is really only worried about himself. So if there's anything that, that he could stand to gain over the next 2 or 3 years by getting rid of the filibuster, I could totally see him being like, yeah, let's do it. Who cares about 4 or 5 years from now anyway? And maybe that's where, McConnell really was kind of a savvy operator, and that even at his advanced age, a number of years ago, was probably already kind of thinking ahead to, well, if Joe Biden was president, this could come in handy for us, which it obviously
yep.
did in a number of instances. And we touched on this last week, how the Republican agenda is basically, of cutting taxes and judges. You can do that and still have the filibuster, and then it can benefit you when a Democrat comes into power who has a more expansive legislative agenda, and you can kind of throw sand in the gears of that. So, maybe that ends up being the end game. Now, I will say, if that is the end game that Trump has in mind, he's played that pretty close to the vest, where his talking points have been that, Democrats are going to pay a price. It's just a clean CR. He hasn't mentioned the filibuster whatsoever, but I could see that, Trump being kind of the wily operator that he is, sort of being the ace in the hole, that 2 weeks from now, throwing a shutdown, maybe there'll start to be some talk of that.
I think your ultimate point that we kind of can't really know how this is going to play out right now is such an important one, because I want to link that back to Jimmy Kimmel, because man, when the Jimmy Kimmel story happened, when he was first canceled last week, I felt really, really glum, like about as bad as I had during the second Trump administration. And it turns out that there was much more of the story left to be written at record speed. And obviously, this is the stakes with the shutdown are very different in so many respects. But if we knew what was going to happen, then it would have already happened. And I think the fact that we've reached a point where Democrats actually have a coherent message, are actually all on the same page, are not about to get surprised by Republicans unexpectedly passing a bill through the House, which is what happened in March. I think that already is a very strong sign. And look, maybe they'll cave at some point. Maybe they simply have to. Who knows? But I think that this to me emphasizes the point of that if you believe in democracy and our freedoms and our country, this is why you fight. Because if
Yep.
you don't know if you're ever going to win, but if you don't fight, you're guaranteed to lose.
Yep, that's a great note to end it on. And we'll be back next Friday to kind of unpack by then, what I assume will be the early days of the shutdown and how things are going, and see if the calculation I think Schumer is making, where they're fighting on favorable terrain because Democrats love talking about healthcare. It's a good issue for them. That will end up kind of carrying the day over Trump screaming that it's a Schumer shutdown or something like that. So we'll have that to talk about next week. Let me remind you on the way out that if you enjoy a conversation today, or either the Down Ballot or Public Notice, and haven't already subscribed to both of our publications, subscribe to both of them. If you like either of us, we're a package deal on the show, and
Yeah.
I think you'll like the Down Ballot coverage, the Might Be Cheryl conversation. That's rated in David's wheelhouse, and the Trump authoritarian conversation is right in my wheelhouse. So subscribe to both of our publications. We'll be back here a week from today. Thanks to the nearly 900 of you who tuned in this afternoon, and have a great weekend. See you next time.
Bye, everybody.